In November of 2022, 21-year-old Aaron Davis set out on a road trip to see his girlfriend. Aaron was making the journey from Georgia to Alabama, and along the way, he stopped by his best friend's house for an overnight visit. But when a couple of days passed and Aaron still hadn't made it to Alabama, his loved ones knew that something was seriously wrong. But no one could have guessed the horrific truth of what happened to Aaron. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Summer Sanchez, and today is day number 3 of this little series. I will be uploading one new video every day in the lead up to and including Halloween. Today we are talking about the tragic case of Aaron Davis. In 2022, 21-year-old Brandon Christopher Reisner was living with his father and stepmother in Rome, Georgia. Brandon had grown up in Cumming, Georgia, where he lived with his mom and his stepdad, but he had moved in with his dad and stepmom a year earlier. Brandon's family were members of the LDS Church, and this was a really big part of his life. He was described as very funny and kind, and he was really into acting and music. He would often write his own songs and upload them to YouTube, and you can actually still find some of his songs there today. But as Brandon grew up, he began having some struggles. He was diagnosed with Tourette's and OCD when he was a child, and Brandon was described as a very awkward kid. He was very quiet and reserved, and he had a hard time making friends. But when Brandon was in the 8th grade, he met a boy named Aaron Davis, and the two of them clicked right away, and they became best friends. They bonded over their religion. Aaron was also a part of the LDS Church, and they also both loved movies and acting. They would even do little skits together and upload them to YouTube.
How does it look, Brandon?
It's beautiful, Grandpa. It's beautiful. Run! You!
And it's sad watching this knowing what we know now, because you can tell that they were having so much fun together and you can really see how close they were. Brandon was always over at Aaron's house. He would eat dinner with Aaron's family all the time, and he was always having sleepovers at the Davis house. Brandon became like another son to Aaron's parents, and the feeling was mutual with Brandon's parents towards Aaron. But as Brandon grew up, there was a noticeable shift in his demeanor. He started becoming depressed, and he was becoming more closed off from his family. He also started having intrusive thoughts. And all of this really came to a head when Brandon went off for his first mission trip after he graduated high school. Mormons typically go on their first mission trip between the ages of 18 and 25. And so when Brandon graduated from high school, he embarked on his first trip, and this did not go well at all. He started having panic attacks, and the intrusive thoughts became more and more intense, and he started to worry that he was going to hurt somebody. He also described this feeling of being detached and feeling as if he was an outsider looking in on his life. And Brandon was telling his parents about all of this, and they were concerned. He started seeing a therapist, and according to Brandon's mom, the therapist told them that the intrusive thoughts were nothing to worry about, and it was highly unlikely that he would ever act on them. But that actually couldn't be further from the truth. Brandon never did complete his mission. He was just having way too many struggles with his mental health, and so he ended up returning home to his mother's house in Cumming, Georgia. Brandon decided that he needed a change of scenery, and so he moved about an hour-and-a-half drive away to Rome, Georgia to live with his dad and stepmom. But Brandon didn't stay there for long, and in 2021, he started college at Brigham Young University, Idaho. And this just happened to be the same college that his best friend Aaron Davis was attending, and the boys even ended up becoming roommates. So this was kind of like the perfect scenario. You know, you're rooming with your best friend away at college, having your first true taste of freedom. This should have been a really special time for Brandon, but his dark thoughts and his depression just started to rear its head again, and the panic attack started up again. So after just one semester at BYU, Idaho, Brandon packed up his bags and he moved back home. At this point, he was at an all-time low. All of his friends are off doing missions or attending college, and he is now back at home in Georgia, living with his dad and stepmom. Now, like I said, Brandon was really into acting, and he started thinking about seriously trying to pursue an acting career. And in an attempt to get some acting experience, during the fall of 2022, Brandon got a job working as a scare actor in a haunted house attraction in Canton, Georgia. That October, Brandon spent his nights in costume, scaring adults adults and kids at the haunted house, completely immersed in these really creepy scenes surrounded by fake blood and gore. And it was around this time that Brandon claimed his delusions intensified. These delusions seemed to get worse when he would smoke marijuana and drink alcohol. He started having these really disturbing thoughts, and he claimed that he started hearing the voice of God, and God was giving him prophecies. He actually gave him 3 prophecies. God told Brandon that he had a serious decision to make in the coming weeks. He could either murder his best friend Aaron Davis, or he could have sex with his stepmother. Brandon chose to murder Aaron because he thought that he would get less sexual pleasure in committing the murder than he would having sex with his stepmom. In another prophecy, Brandon claimed that God said Aaron would soon become just as deranged as he was, and he would go on to hurt his younger siblings. And so he needed to kill Aaron in order to save Aaron's siblings. And the final prophecy was that once he killed his best friend, he would be rewarded with a relationship with Aaron's sister Lorelai. Brandon had apparently been interested in Aaron's sister for a while, and he said that God told him Lorelai would be like a reward. And Brandon has claimed that these delusions became stronger when he would drink and smoke marijuana. He said his desire to kill would become unbearably strong. So Brandon has made his choice, and he has started planning something horrific, and it would all play out in less than a month. And what's really messed up is that in the weeks leading up to what Brandon goes on to do, he actually went and visited Aaron at his parents' house on multiple occasions. Aaron's mother was cooking for him. His family was treating him like one of their own, just like they always did. And all the while, Brandon is secretly planning to kill Aaron. He also wrote a song hinting at what he was about to do. He wrote, "It doesn't matter what you do. Go kill someone. Go love someone. You can't plan the future. God decided it for you." On November 10th, just a week and a half after the haunted house closed up for the season, Brandon got a call from Aaron informing him that he was going to be stopping by for a visit. Aaron had just graduated from Brigham Young University in Idaho with a degree in political science, and he had recently decided to pursue teaching, and he wanted to get his master's degree. In fact, on the morning that Aaron made that call to Brandon informing him that he'd be coming for a visit, he had just taken the exam for entry to the graduate program, which he passed with flying colors. Aaron Davis was very kind and intelligent. He was very close with all of his siblings and his parents. He had a great upbringing. He was just a very happy, friendly, caring person. And he knew how much his best friend Brandon struggled with his mental health, and so Aaron was always trying to be sensitive and kind towards Brandon. At the age of 21, Aaron had already accomplished so much, and he had dreams of becoming a college professor, getting married to his girlfriend, and starting a family, and he was well on his way to achieving all of those things, but tragically his life would be cut short by someone that he loved and trusted. So like I said, Aaron made plans to visit his girlfriend Charlie Girl in Alabama. His plan was to make the drive from Cumming, Georgia to Charlie Girl's home in Alabama, and on his way out, he decided to stop by and visit his best friend Brandon Reisner. Where Brandon was living in Rome, Georgia was on the way to Alabama. So it just kind of made sense for Aaron to add that stop to his trip. So on November 10th, Aaron made that phone call to Brandon. They made plans to hang out that night. Aaron would sleep over, and then he would wake up in the morning and finish his drive to Alabama the next day. Aaron arrived at Brandon's house at around 4 o'clock that afternoon, and Brandon's dad and stepmom were not home for the weekend. They were actually out of town on a trip, and so the boys were going to have the house all to themselves that night. Brandon did have to leave Aaron for a couple of hours because he had to work a shift at his job at the Rome Athletic Club. He worked his shift, and then on his way home, he picked up a bottle of wine. He then arrived back home to his house, and then he and Aaron decided to go out to a couple of bars where they had some drinks. Now, Aaron was not a drinker. According to his family and his close friends, he never drank. So this was out of character for Aaron, and it's thought that Brandon pressured Aaron to drink with him that night just to get him into a vulnerable state. But the guys hung out for a bit, they finished up their drinks, and then they headed back to Brandon's house. They arrived back at Brandon's home at around 11 o'clock p.m. They drank some of that wine that Brandon had bought earlier. They sang karaoke together. Brandon played Aaron some songs on his guitar. And just keep in mind that this entire time, Brandon knows what he's about to do. He is having this super fun night with his best friend, fully knowing that he's about to murder him. Brandon believed that Aaron's arrival at his house on a night when his parents were out of town, that this was a sign from God, that God had placed Aaron in the right place at the right time so he could kill him. And at around midnight, Aaron headed upstairs to bed, but the alcohol had really made him sick, and so he ended up throwing up before then going into the guest room and falling asleep. Meanwhile, Brandon is downstairs gearing up for what he's about to do. He has made sure that he is sufficiently drunk because remember, remember Brandon said that alcohol makes his desire to kill even more intense, and it's believed that he drank so much that night so that he would be ready for what he was about to do. He picked out a weapon. He decided on a thin, sharp kitchen knife, and he laid it out so it would be ready when he was ready. He then went upstairs and climbed out of a bedroom window, and he got on top of the roof, and he started spying on Aaron through the guest bedroom window. He said, "I was a man with a plan. I got on the roof and stalked my prey." And this was all part of some sick fantasy that Brandon had. And as Aaron peacefully slept, completely trusting and unaware that he was in serious danger, Brandon got off the roof, climbed back through the window, went downstairs and grabbed the knife that he had already picked out earlier. He then walked back upstairs and into the guest room, and he stabbed his best friend 40 times. The majority of the injuries Aaron sustained happened while he was still alive. This was an incredibly brutal, violent attack. This was overkill. And later, during an autopsy, it was discovered that there were no defensive wounds found on Aaron's body, which meant that he never saw any of this coming. He never had a chance to defend himself. And once Brandon thought that Aaron was dead, he dragged his body into the shower and he began attempting to dismember his body. This didn't go as planned, however, and instead of dismembering him, he ended up disemboweling him. Over the course of that night and into the following day, Brandon would stop the cleaning and disposal process and he would watch movies, specifically No Country for Old Men. He would also do online searches for things like new bed sheets, stain remover, hydrochloric acid. He also searched for advice on how to get blood out of carpet and how to drain a washing machine. And he also wrote another song, and this time the lyrics were literally about what he had just done to his best friend. He wrote, "He screamed till he choked on his own tongue and blood. His scream became a gargle as he swallowed his tongue." Brandon then went out to Walmart and he bought duct tape, bed sheets, and cleaning supplies, and he went back home. He wrapped Aaron's body in the sheets and the comforter, and then he used the duct tape to keep it all wrapped up. He then put the body into a suitcase, and then he put the suitcase into the trunk of Aaron's own car. He drove to a wooded area behind a local church, and he put Aaron's body inside of a hole that had been left from a fallen tree, and he covered it up with dirt as best as he could. He then drove to a local park that had a river running through it. It was called Heritage Park. And the initial plan was that he was going to push the car into the river. But once he was done disposing of the body, he was just too tired for that part. And so he just put the car in neutral and he let it roll into a ditch. He then went home and continued trying to clean up. Now, the last time that Charlie Girl, Aaron's girlfriend, had heard from him was on the evening of the 10th, the day that Aaron arrived at Brandon's. And the next day, when she tried calling Aaron's cell phone, she wasn't getting an answer. This was completely out of the norm because they were always in contact with each other. And so later that day, when she still couldn't get Aaron, she called Brandon because at that point she's starting to get worried and she knew that Aaron had spent the night at Brandon's. And so she called Brandon just to see what was going on, and he started making up all of these lies. He tells her that Aaron's phone was dead and that they were on a walk right now and Aaron couldn't talk. Charlie Girl thought that this was weird, but she just says okay, and she just continues to try to contact Aaron for the rest of the day. At this point, Aaron would have made it to Alabama. The drive from Georgia to Alabama really isn't that long. It can easily be done in a day. And also, Aaron is not answering his cell phone. And so Charlie Girl is really starting to panic. And on the morning of the 12th, so this is now 2 days after the murder, Charlie Girl called Brandon again, and now she's demanding answers. Brandon tries to reassure her that everything is fine. He says that Aaron's phone is still dead and that he had went back home to his parents' house and coming to pick up his Nintendo Switch, and then he would be heading to Alabama. It seems to me like Brandon did not think this situation through as far as the aftermath goes. It's like he planned out the murder to a T, but he seems to be all over the place trying to cover his tracks. And now alarm bells are starting to go off for Charlie Girl, and she tells Brandon that she and her family are heading to Georgia to go look for Aaron because something bad must have happened. This just wasn't making sense. And this is when Brandon starts putting those acting skills to use, and he starts playing the part of the concerned friend. He starts calling Aaron's phone like he's actually trying to get a hold of him, even though he knows he's been dead for 2 days. He tells his family that he's going to go search for Aaron, and he does actually go out and he pretends like he's searching for Aaron. Now, by this point, Aaron's abandoned car had been located. A Rome police officer had discovered the car the morning of November 12th. The car actually belonged to Aaron's dad, and so when the officers ran the plate number, Aaron's dad's name popped up. And so they called him to ask him about the car, and they're like, your car is in a ditch in Rome, Georgia. Can you tell us what's going on? This confirmed to Aaron's family that something bad had happened. And so at this point, he was officially considered a missing person. And as the police are in the park processing the car, Brandon actually shows up and he is pretending like he's trying to join in the search for Aaron. But what he's really doing is putting an alibi into place and pretending like he's worried. He knows that the police are going to come talk to him because everyone knows that Aaron had been with him last. And so he tells officers that he and Aaron had been drinking the night of the 10th. Aaron got sick from the alcohol and he went to bed and he was gone by the time Brandon woke up the next morning and he didn't know where he was. After he gave that statement and he had, shown himself and made it seem like he was actually worried about Aaron and actually looking for him, he went back home to continue cleaning up the blood because there is still blood everywhere. It's on the ceiling, it's on the carpet, it is soaked through the subfloor, it's on the bed. It's just an absolute horror scene in that house. And as he is desperately trying to clean up the crime scene, there's a knock at the door and it's police. They wanted to just ask a few follow-up questions and they wanted to hear more of what Brandon had to say about the last time he saw Aaron. And as the officers are asking him questions, Brandon starts stretching, like the type of stretches that a person might do before they go for a run, which police found odd, but they just kind of ignored it. Before they left, police asked if they could look around the house, and surprisingly, Aaron does consent to this. And I mean, it took no time at all for them to discover the nightmare upstairs. And what does Brandon do? He actually takes off. He literally bolts out of the house and he just starts running. Police did attempt to catch up with him, but they were unsuccessful. Now, Brandon didn't know what to do or where to go at this point, and he is in full-blown panic mode. He ends up going to his work at Rome Athletic Club and he took a shower and he just tried to lay low because at this point, it wasn't widespread knowledge that any of this was happening, and so he just stayed there, not really knowing what to do next. By this point, Brandon's dad and stepmom had arrived back home from their trip, and at first they couldn't find Brandon anywhere either, but they did think that there was a chance he could be at the athletic club, and they were right. They picked Brandon up and he immediately tells them everything. He even directs them to the wooded area behind the church where Aaron's body was buried. His stepmom later said that after Brandon told them that he had murdered his best friend and buried his body in the woods, he started singing along to the car radio like he didn't have a care in the world. Brandon thought that his parents were going to help him escape, like maybe they would help him to get out of the country, but that is not what happened. Brandon's dad, Jeremy, of course, was totally devastated and horrified, and he told Brandon that he had to turn himself in, and he drove him to the police station. Brandon told police everything that he had done, and he told them where they could find Aaron's remains. Brandon pleaded guilty to the murder of Aaron Davis, 2 counts of aggravated assault, aggravated battery, abandonment of a dead body, and theft, as well as misdemeanor removal of body parts from a crime scene.
23-year-old Brandon Reisner admits to stabbing one of his closest friends to death. On June 20th, Reisner pleaded guilty to murdering 21-year-old Aaron Davis.
How do you plead to the charges, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Do you understand the murder charges carry a potential sentence of life without parole?
Yes.
And when investigators asked why Brandon had killed someone so important to him, Aaron was his best friend. He was one of the only people in his life that he could always count on to treat him with kindness. Brandon told them that he had been hearing the voice of God telling him that he either needed to commit murder or sleep with his stepmother. And he told them about the other prophecies as well. He said the fact that his parents were out of town and now his friend was going to be there all alone with him that night, that it was a sign from God. He also said that Aaron hadn't hugged him when he arrived at the house that afternoon, and so he took that as a sign as well. When Brandon was asked how he felt after he committed the murder, he said, "I became a carnal animal like in a dream and started to feel emotion for the first time as I started killing Aaron." Now, the forensic search of Brandon's phone showed a lot of interesting searches, some of which I mentioned earlier about sheets, hydrochloric acid, cleaning supplies, but he was also searching up symptoms of schizophrenia. He was watching the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is about a criminal who fakes mental illness. And he said that he was obsessed with the movie American Psycho and he wanted to be the top dog psychopath. So was Brandon truly having delusions and hearing the voice of God? Or was this just an elaborate story that he made up to make himself seem insane? Either way, all of this was very heartbreaking for Aaron's family to hear since they loved Brandon like another son. They thought that they knew this person, but it turns out that no one actually knew who Brandon was or what he was capable of.
Randy Davis says losing his 21-year-old son, Aaron, has been devastating.
and with his best friend Brandon Reisner now accused of murdering Aaron, it makes it even worse.
He's been as much as a son to us as anyone else, so it's really like losing two kids at this point.
Davis says his son left Cumming on Thursday to go to Rome to stay with Reisner. He was then supposed to drive to Alabama to see his girlfriend, but Davis says that never happened.
Got a call that from a policeman in Rome asking if I had a certain car.
That car was found in a ditch at Heritage Park Saturday morning. Aaron's body was later discovered off of Tumlin Drive. Soon after, Rome police arrested Reisner.
His sentencing hearing just took place in July of this year, 2024, and the entire time that the impact statements were being read out by not only Aaron's family and friends, but also Brandon's own parents, he showed absolutely zero emotion.
We did everything in our power to support him and provide the care he needed. Tragically, while I was back and living at home, that incident occurred that has brought us to this point. In November of 2022, Brandon's best friend since childhood, Aaron Davis, was staying at our home while we were out of town. For no discernible reason, Brandon took the life of Aaron Davis, a person who was truly like family to us. Likewise, Brandon was a loving part of the Davis family. This heartbreaking event occurred in our home, leaving both families and the community absolutely devastated.
Even when the state was showing photos of Aaron's dead body, he had absolutely no response.
So this is the front and back of Aaron. There's significant injuries to the neck, both in the front and the back. There are also injuries down along this side. Those begin with I and go into JKL, and I'll show a different angle of those later. But I also want to highlight that there are not injuries on Aaron's hands. Aaron didn't have any defensive wounds. Aaron didn't see this coming. Aaron didn't defend himself. This was not a case of mutual combat or anything like that.
What you see in court is such a stark contrast to the lively, funny person that we saw in those films that he and Aaron made. He just looks blank. Brandon was later diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder once he was in custody, and he is currently being treated for that. And a woman came forward when this case broke with a very creepy story about an encounter that she had had with Brandon just 10 days before the murder. This woman was a pet sitter, and she'd been hired by Brandon's parents, and this was an overnight pet sitting job. I guess his parents were out of town at the time, and she said that she was at the family home tending to the pets, and Brandon showed up unexpectedly. Like, no one was supposed to be there that night. She said he came in and made himself a mixed drink, and he offered to make her one as well, but she turned down the offer. She eventually went to the guest bedroom to go to sleep for the night, but Brandon kept trying to get inside of her room and have sex with her. She said he was very persistent, and after she rejected him repeatedly, she finally just pretended to be asleep so he would go away and leave her alone. But instead of leaving the room and leaving her alone, he stood there in the room and watched her sleep or pretend to be asleep. And now that we know everything we know about Brandon and how he says that his urge to kill gets really strong when he drinks, and just all of the dark thoughts and delusions that he said he was having in the days leading up to the murders, could he have been planning to kill the pet sitter that night? That could be why he stood in the room and stared at her for a while. Maybe he was contemplating what he was going to do. Thankfully, she did make it out okay, and she ended up quitting the next day because she was just so creeped out. Now, that woman wanted to tell this story at the sentencing hearing, but the judge did not allow it, so her account has not been proven. In the end, Brandon Reisner was given the maximum sentence, which was life without the possibility of parole.
Justice requires that Mr. Reisner be sentenced on count 1 to imprisonment for life without parole.
Brandon's family did beg the court to show mercy and at least let him be eligible for parole, but that did not happen. And hopefully Aaron's family can get some sort of peace knowing that his killer will never again walk free. And I also hope that Brandon's family finds some peace as well. They were also completely devastated by not just their son going away for life, but also losing someone who was just like a son to them. Just a total tragedy all around. And that is all I have on this case. Let me know what you think about this one down in the comments. Please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications if you want to know when tomorrow's video goes live. We still have 2 more videos going live between now and Halloween. And as always, I appreciate each and every one of you for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.